Hi, my name's Simon Thorpe. I'm a CNRS Research Director at the Brain and Cognition Research Centre in Toulouse, and today I want to talk about AI, technological unemployment and universal basic income. So the plan is as follows. There's going to be a first part where I'm going to talk about why humans are not going to be able to compete with AI, and why I think many paid jobs are simply going to disappear in the next 10 to 20 years. And why this could be a disaster unless we do something about it now. In part two, I'll talk about what I think is the best solution. It's why a universal basic income is the solution for me. And I'll talk about 4 different ways of financing a UBI. One is central bank money creation. Another one is what's called negative income. It's basically basic income plus a flat rate tax on revenue. Those are 2 ideas that would work well at the national or regional level. Then I'll talk about 2 other possibilities, a 0.1% tax on financial transactions and a 0.1% annual tax on all assets that could be implemented at the global level. In part 3, I'll actually talk about another idea, an IOU-based transaction system implementing UBI with no need for conventional money at all. Bottom line is, I think that actually, if we do the right things, the future could be very good indeed. We could be living in a world where basically humans enjoy themselves and let the robots and the AI systems do all our hard work for us. So this talk actually brings together 2 passions in my life. One is the fact that for over 40 years, I've been trying to work out how the brain works, essentially. How do we recognize images and sounds? And can we build artificial systems that use inspiration from biology? But since 2010, I've been very interested. My wife would say totally obsessed with fixing the economy. I've had a blog on the economy since 2012. If you're very keen, you can download the whole thing. It's about 800 pages. It's had over 600,000 visits. But rather than reading the whole thing, you could just try a few of my YouTube and TEDx talks. Radical Proposals for Monetary Reform, that's from 2012, Fixing the Economic System in 2015. And then this other one, which is fairly close to today's talk, AI, Neural Technology and Social Transformation, that I gave in a meeting at the Emergent Technology Conference in Toulouse in October 2017, which is where I met Callum Chase, who invited me to join the Economic Singularity Club. And indeed, I should point out that this talk is actually very much based on a course that the Economic Singularity group gave over the last couple of weeks to various people. So a bit about my day job, as I say, researching how the brain does vision, memory, and so on. Briefly, I did a psychology and physiology in Oxford and then did a doctorate. I did a postdoc in Canada, moved to Paris in '83, moved to Toulouse to set up the Brain and Cognition Research Centre in 1993, and I've been working on ultra-rapid scene processing. But we developed ideas with my students that led to the creation of a startup called SpikeNet Technology in 1999, which was doing spike-based image processing, bio-inspired vision, essentially. In 2016, SpikeNet was acquired by BrainChip Incorporated, and they're building spiking neural chips called Akida. If you Google me, Google Scholar, you'll discover that my biggest hit is a paper that came out in 1996, Speed of Processing in the Human Visual System, which basically showed that the human visual system can process, even unexpected images very quickly and decide, for instance, whether the image contains an animal, even when you don't know what to look for. We also developed tasks using eye movements, saccadic eye movements, where you can prove that visual processing is even faster when you're using eye movements. And then at the same time, we're doing various studies on spike-based strategies for rapid processing. That was what led us to creating SpikeNet technology. So the sort of the phenomenon that's interested me most is this fast vision in biological systems. We've known since the 70s that if you flash images at 10 frames a second, these are pictures of animals, your visual system will process them very happily. You won't be able to remember what all the animals were, but if I throw in one image which is not an animal into a sequence, as I'm going to do now, just see if you can spot the odd man out. I suspect that most, if not all of you, saw the Mona Lisa, although you weren't expecting that particularly. And indeed, if you insert images like that, such as these ones here are other images which, if you insert them in a stream of images, the visual system will recognize them. And so one of the challenges I've been interested in is how does the brain do it, and can we do artificial systems that do the same sort of thing? To cut a long story short, this is a sort of way we think of vision going on. You've got an image comes in, it goes through all these layers in the visual system, and you end up, this is in the monkey visual system, where at about 100 milliseconds after the image comes on, you get neurons firing selectively to faces, for instance. We use that sort of information to argue that the processing has to be essentially feed forward. You don't have time to go back and check on anything. You only get a few milliseconds per processing step, and that really puts a severe constraint on the sort of operations that can be done in the brain. And essentially it means that you only get one spike per neuron. Neurons don't send floating point numbers, they send pulses called spikes. And basically under these conditions you can do vision even when each neuron along the visual pathways only gets to fire one spike. Now, can we do this with a computer? Well, the fact is that for a long time I assumed that no, the human visual system is just obviously just too good. But then there was a thing called the Imagenet challenge, which was developed in the early 2000s. You give computer scientists 10 million training images with 10,000 labels. You then train your system up and give it some new images, and your system has to decide which of the 1,000 possible labels is appropriate. Now, I was at the European Conference on Computer Vision in 2012, where everybody was the place was buzzing because the state of the art in computer vision had been beaten by a really simple feed-forward convolutional neural network that had been trained with a mechanism called backpropagation. It was actually Jeff Hinton and his two students at the University of Toronto did this, and their paper has now been cited over 117,000 times. It's like 5 times more than everything I've ever published. Really remarkable. They have a really, really simple architecture. The image comes in, goes through a bunch of convolutional layers, some fully collected layers, and then you've got this output layer. They've essentially got 1,000 different neurons that correspond to different labels. And they give you all the details of how many neurons you've got each layer, what the filter's like at the first layer, and so on. And it's got 650,000 neurons, which isn't very much relative to the human visual system. Lots of parameters, lots of synapses. But the fact is, it does extremely well. So this is AlexNet in 2013. It thrashed the existing state-of-the-art in computer vision. Now, things have improved since then. We're now at 99.05% correct on Imagenet with the best artificial systems. Now, in 2013, a very courageous guy tried to train himself to do Imagenet. Spent a long time over the summer trying to learn the 57 dog breeds that it includes and so on. And he was very pleased because in 2013 he got 94% correct, which was better than the computers. But you can see that from about 2015 on, basically, humans can't compete. We're not competitive. Artificial systems have outperformed humans on this challenging, difficult visual task since 2015. And the other thing, I was talking about measuring processing speed in the human visual system. This is my day job. Basically, you can't make a decision and press a button or anything in less than about 400 milliseconds. So you could maybe do 2 images a second of saying, Dr. House and Mr. Bean or whatever. Now, GPUs, graphics processors, can do the Imagenet task at over 16,000 images a second. Here we go. This is AlexNet being done at 16,000 frames a second. We can do 2. So basically, you might say, well, why are we so slow? Well, it's actually quite simple. Nerve fibers transmit spikes at about 1 meter per second. So when I was showing you this graph here, and you've got signals going along this pathway, well, that distance in the monkey is like 40 milliseconds at 1 meter per second. Most of the time is just conduction delays, and so we can't win. And in comparison, in a GPU, the transmission is close to the speed of light. So basically, we don't have a chance. The other thing that means that we won't be able to compete with AI is that, as you may know, human visual system has a fovea, a very high resolution bit that you have to move around in order to do things like reading. Now, we can move your eyes fairly quickly. In some experiments, we managed to get people making up to 5 saccades a second, which is pretty good. But actually, computers don't need to move eyes at all. They can process images in parallel. Back in 2001, with my student Arnaud Delorme, we'd taken a really dumb feed-forward convolutional neural network and processed an entire image and recognized 40 different people in lots of different positions. That took about 30 minutes in 2001 to do. But then we set up SpikeNet technology, as I mentioned, in 1999, and within a few years we got the processing time from 30 minutes down to about 1 second. How do we do it? By chopping out all the complicated floating point numbers and all the rest of it. It's all done with very, very sparse spiking activity and actually binary connections, no weights at all. The same architecture now would take a few milliseconds, and it will do it in parallel. So basically, the brain is, it's very interesting. It's got 86 billion neurons, lots of neurons in the cortex, 16 billion, maybe 4 billion in the visual system. Its clock speed, if you like, that's the speed at which it can generate pulses, is absolutely, you can't get a neuron to fire more than 1 kilohertz because the spikes themselves last a millisecond. And then you've got this really serious problem with the conduction velocities. Neurons are just slow. It's very low power, only uses 20 watts, but in comparison, if you go out and buy yourself an NVIDIA graphics board, you can get 36 teraflops and thousands of cores, billions of transistors. It gets quite hot, 350 watts, and it costs quite a bit. But these are actually great for relatively small problems like Imagenet, where you can do, as I said, you can do 16,000 images a second and work out what object's present. But could you simulate the entire human brain this way? Well, it depends how you do it. If you wanted to take the sort of standard model of how brains are simulated, and you say you've got 86 billion neurons in the brain, let's say on average 7,000 synapses each, and if you wanted to recalculate the state of the brain with 1 millisecond precision, you would need a total of 600 petaflops, where a petaflop is 1,000 million. A lot of computations. Now, the most powerful computers on the planet can only manage that. Basically, that's the supercomputer in Fugaku in Japan. It will do 500 petaflops, but it's using like 30 megawatts of power. It's a football field full of computing power, whereas the brain is like 20 watts. It's 1.5 million times more energy efficient than doing this sort of calculation. So you might say, oh well, that's good. Humans are safe. We're not going to install a football field of computers to replace a human brain. But it's not so clear, because while if you want to use a conventional computing methods to do simulated brain, that is expensive, but there are lots of people working on low power neuromorphic chips that sort of look like work a little bit like neurons. So going back to 2014, IBM had their True North chip that very low power device, had a million neurons on it. Movidius came out with a compute stick that you can basically doing sort of neural star computation. 74 euros it cost a few years ago. They were bought up by Intel, who now bought a second generation one, neural stick, compute stick 280 euros currently on Amazon. Intel's also working on the low EE research chip, with about 1 million neurons on it. And BrainChip, the company who bought up SpikeNet technology in 2016, is producing a chip called Akida with about 1.2 million neurons on it. And all of these things are actually great for sort of edge computing, where you're trying to process images or sounds or whatever. It's great. Could you simulate a human brain this way? Well, let's be honest. If you wanted to do 16 billion neurons, you would need 16,000 of these in a box. It's not really very practical. But in the last few years, I've been working on a thing called the TerraBrain project. Our aim is to simulate networks of billions or even trillions of neurons in real time using standard off-the-shelf hardware, no specialized hardware at all. The trick is that we don't use floating point numbers for activation levels and weights. We just use very much simplified computation using spikes, essentially. It turns out that spiking neural networks are very much the craze. It's not just me who's interested in this. So conventional neural processing, you take neurons coming in here and sending floating point numbers, and you multiply them by the weights and all the rest of it. Event-driven processing uses just pulses, a bit like neurons, but here again we've got floating point numbers for the weights. You can simplify this by having binary synapses, and you can make things even simpler if you do what we call N of M coding, where you only let a few of the neurons fire, so you can really have a very sparse coding, and this turns out to be very efficient. It's actually the trick that we used in SpikeNet technology to speed up by 10,000 fold, and that was as we saw earlier on. So can those ideas be scaled up? Well, it's early days yet, but Pierre Kukel, who was a master's student last year in Toulouse, was using the NVIDIA GPU that we were looking at with all its cores and all the rest of it. And he managed to do a simulation with 1 billion neurons, 100 million inputs, 4 billion connections, and he could process 1 million input spikes in 18 milliseconds, which is like 2 billion synaptic updates a second. Aditya Kar, who's just finished a master's with me, has been doing the same thing, but not with a fancy GPU, just with a standard off-the-shelf MacBook Pro, which has got lots of memory on the chip, unified memory, solid-state disk, GPU and CPU cores. It's only using 39 watts, which is 10 times more power efficient, less power than the GPU. So it's slower than the GPU, but the code runs on an iPad Air as well. The next steps, we're wondering whether to buy a Mac Studio M1 Ultra, which has 128 gigabytes of unified memory on chip and 8 terabytes of solid state disk, lots of cores and so on. $6,000. We could, on the other hand, wait for another couple of weeks, because I think they're going to be a Mac Studio M2 chip with I don't know how much memory on the chip and so on. The bottom line is that using these simple techniques, TerraBrain systems, ones with trillions of neurons, or certainly billions and probably trillions of neurons, are going to be possible within not very long. There's another thing about the TerraBrain challenge project that I want to talk about. It's the learning challenge. Deep learning systems that we use for doing Imagenet and so on are very slow at learning, whereas humans actually will learn anything that repeats with no training set. You don't have to tell it what to learn. If you just repeat any meaningless noise a few times, the brain picks it up. It's unsupervised learning, and we've managed to come up with a learning rule we call JAST learning rule, named after Jake, Amir, Simon and Tim, the inventors of this. It essentially uses binary weights like this, and it moves the weights around to match the patterns that repeat. Now, this works, and we think something like that might be happening with real neurons, but the real neurons have a limitation, because when they're looking for patterns, a real neuron can only look within the space of its inputs, a few thousand inputs. But with a TerraBrain simulation, the neurons can actually have inputs from any other neurons. And we've already got a billion neuron system that has a billion possible connections to choose from. So each of the neurons there can look and try to find patterns in much richer and undefined input spaces. I think that such a system would potentially be orders of magnitude more intelligent than a human, because it would be able to spot patterns that we just would miss. if you were looking for some repeating pattern in the activity in the internet, for instance. I mean, there are just so many things going on. You can't do it with a human brain, but you could with this sort of system. So can we assume that we will not be replaced by AI and robots? No, I don't think so. We don't stand a chance. I mean, there's no way that the technology is not going to just simply rip away many of the things that humans currently get paid to do. So are you scared yet, human? So, the question is, how do we cope when AI and robots take our jobs? And this is what Callum Chase has been talking about for many years now in the Economic Singularity program. But I also want to mention two recent things which I think show what a serious challenge advances in AI are going to be for keeping people's jobs. OpenAI is a sort of consortium of people who are developing AI products, actually not for commercial benefit. In fact, they have a big point about this. They want it to be for humanity and so on. It's all very noble. And they have a thing called GPT-3, which is a natural language system that you can now anybody can sign up and get an account for GPT-3, and you can ask. This is just straight off their webpage. These are all the different things you can get GPT to do. For instance, you can get it to summarize text for a second grader. Summarize this for a second grade student. Jupiter is the fifth planet from the sun, etc. And it compresses it down to that, and it does it for free. Then you can ask it questions like, here's the prompt. I'm a highly intelligent question answering bot. If you ask me a question rooted in truth, I'll give you the answer. Example, what is GPT-3? GPT-3 is a machine learning platform that enables developers to train and deploy AI models. Who developed backpropagation error learning? Rumelhart, Hinton and Williams developed backpropagation error learning. Those took less than a second to answer those, right? And you can ask it anything you like. So, I asked it the following question: how many people will lose their jobs because of advances in AI and robotics? And the answer was unknown. Now, you may know there was this article in The Guardian actually over 2 years ago, and it was an article that actually written by GPT-3. The title was called "A Robot Wrote This Entire Article. Are You Scared Yet Human?" Well, things have really moved on since then. GPT-3 has 175 billion parameters. They're talking about GPT-4, which will have 100 trillion parameters, which is actually about the same number as synapses in the entire human brain. And God knows only what GPT-5 is going to be like in another few years' time. This is moving really fast. And the other thing I want to mention is OpenAI also has made public a thing called DALL-E 2, where you type in a thing like a bowl of soup that looks like a monster knitted out of wool, and it generates you a set of images, photorealistic images, within a few seconds. This is what happened when I said a photo of a robot construction worker building a skyscraper. Comes back with that. Or a photo of a robot artist. I mean, you can try this out yourself, because DALL-E is now open for everybody. As of the end of September, anybody on the planet can create an account and get this thing to generate images to order, and it's free, and it takes a few seconds. So again, how many people will lose their jobs because of advances in AI and robotics? Well, GPT-3 said answer unknown. Graphic artists, who currently get paid a lot to doing in advertising companies, what are they going to do? So, which jobs are going to go? Well, most people are talking about drivers and shop workers and agricultural workers and industrial workers and airport security staff, etc., etc. But actually, most jobs could go with sufficiently powerful AI. And I think, this is an impending catastrophe. If you imagine all the truck drivers in the States being made unemployed over the next couple of years by Amazon, replacing them all, these are all, there are 3 million of them. They all vote Trump, and they're all heavily armed. I mean, it could be civil war when you try and take their jobs away from them. So I think, it's going to be a catastrophe if we continue with the current economic model. But no, if we act now, and that's when I move on to my, my solutions. I mean, basically, technological unemployment In 1930, John Maynard Keynes was predicting that we'd have 15-hour working weeks by the end of the century. What went wrong? Well, currently employment would be around 93%. So what's going to happen in the future? Well, it depends who you talk to. Some people have this naive view that jobs are going to be created continuously so we can stick at 93% employment. I think that's extremely unlikely. I think it's going to drop quite rapidly. And one of the reasons why I believe that is a book by Dave Graeber called Bullshit Jobs, The Rise of Pointless Work and What We Can Do About It. Because Dave Graeber discovered that 45% of people, if you ask them, they consider that their job has no utility, which means that you could actually drop down to 50% employment in 2030 and almost nothing would have happened to output. Lots of jobs are there just simply so that people can earn enough money to live, but actually are not useful. So, how are people going to survive if they can't earn a living? I mean, one option is abundance. That's the idea that many things could actually be provided for free, and I'm going to show you that that's already the case, and it could definitely get better. Many things are effectively already free, and you could call these sort of universal basic services. I mean, in many societies, education is essentially free. Even at university level, there are quite a lot of countries where you effectively pay next to nothing. Health is also universally provided free of cost in most sensible countries, with the obvious exception of the US, where 30 million people don't have any health cover. But anyway, that's an anomaly that needs explaining. Transport, well, these are cities where transport is free now, and they're getting more and more common. There's a place just near where I live where the public transport is free. Internet essentially free because you can get Wi-Fi in many places for free. So what else could you provide for free? Well, I think energy and water are an interesting one. As you know, at the moment, with energy prices going through the roof, in the UK, Liz Truss's government has come up with this wonderful scheme of borrowing 150 billion to subsidise prices. Now, I think if you think about it, the winners in this are going to be the energy companies because essentially the taxpayer is going to pay for them to make massive profits. Commercial banks, because they lend the government 150 billion and charge interest on it. And then you've got rich people with large energy bills who actually get paid more from the taxpayer's budget than people who are struggling to heat their houses at all. The losers are going to be the poor, who are going to have to pay the interest on this for years to come. Now, there's actually a perfectly good alternative, and it's been proposed by the New Economics Foundation, in particular Alfie Sterling, who a few weeks ago was proposing the idea of free basic energy. Rather than capping the cost of electricity, you say up to a certain amount, each household has an amount of electricity which is free, and then you increase the level above the standard rate for anybody using more. That way you encourage people to be frugal. And you also mean that people with minimum or low income can actually just get the basics. Now, it turns out that this has been available in South Africa since 2013. They've had a free basic electricity scheme where households get 50 kilowatt hours per month. Now, that's not a huge amount of electricity, but it's enough to cook with, and it means you don't have to go out and chop down trees to get firewood to cook your food. It could be expanded. Actually, South Africa has also had free basic water since 2001. You get 6,000 litres of water per month per household. Again, not huge amount, but enough to stop people dying of thirst. What about basic food? Well, George Monbiot in his book Regenesis has been pushing, I think, a very interesting idea, that is that rather than using cows to produce proteins, which is actually not very efficient, you can use precision fermentation to produce proteins, and actually you can make any proteins you like. So one of the first successes for precision fermentation was the manufacturing of insulin, which is now done in vats essentially. But it can be used to produce literally any protein. So you could produce food stuffs using far less land, because this uses like 1,000 times less land than growing soya beans. So we literally could probably feed the world's population almost for free. I mean, obviously you'd pay more if you wanted to have more fancy stuff, but this, this is quite palatable if you do it well. It certainly, could mean the end of starvation. So, providing free services works. I didn't even mention that governments also provide things like museum, parks, fire service and police for free. But what about providing free money? Free money is essentially what a basic income is. And if we did provide free money, what would be the impact on the economic singularity? Now, my argument is going to be that universal basic income is the solution to the challenges posed by advances in AI, robotics and automation. And frankly, I don't know any good arguments against. What I do hear is that people say, it will cost too much. But hopefully I'm going to demonstrate to you now that that's simply not true. Now, UBI is, I'm certainly not the only person talking about that. If you type UBI on TED, you get, dozens of stuff. And UBI has been proposed by many people over the years, including lots of tech experts. But the amazing thing that I don't think most people know is that actually the public want a universal basic income. This is in the US. 67% of people support the idea of a universal basic income. And in Europe, this is a study which showed that 65% wanted a basic income. They support a basic income. So, 2/3 of the population are in favour. Why aren't political parties offering us this? Well, it's true that there are parties. I mean, the UK Green Party has been proposing £89 a week as a basic pay for since 2019. Very interestingly, in the US, Andrew Yang, who was a Democratic Party candidate, Joe Biden got the job, but it could have been Andrew Yang, and he was proposing a freedom dividend, which is essentially a universal basic income, $1,000 a month for every American adult over the age of 18, exactly UBI. In France, we've had Benoît Hamon in 2017 was proposing about €600 a month. Unfortunately, that sort of fell flat because he wasn't able to answer the question of where you're going to find the 300 odd billion a year. That's why I have to get back to that in a moment. Jean-Luc Mélenchon this year was actually proposing it's not a basic income, but it's the right sort of numbers. He was saying €1,063 per month for anybody studying up to the age of 25. Then same amounts, 1,063 for anybody over 60 years as a pension. And then between 18 and retirement, no one would be below the poverty line. They'd be getting €1,063 per month. Actually, that was increased to $1,100 a month during the parliamentary elections after the presidential elections. Now, is that a basic income? Well, unfortunately not, because I've asked the people at France Insoumis, is there going to be means testing for this? And well, basically couldn't answer it. But I think the basic idea is that yes, you get €1,063 a month if you're a student, but if you go out and pick grapes or work at McDo or McDonald's, then you would lose your aid. In other words, it's not a basic unconditional income. It's a basic income if you like, but it's not unconditional. You have to not be working. Now, let's talk about the question of how you finance a universal basic income. I'm going to propose 4 solutions. One is central bank money creation. The other is reforming the tax and benefit system, essentially negative income tax. And I'm going to propose a couple of global solutions, taxing financial transactions and taxing assets. So firstly, central bank money creation. You may be aware that the European Central Bank has purchased €3,463 billion worth of assets since 2014. This is essentially money creation. And most of it's been used to buy up government bonds on the secondary market, though actually, amazingly, quite a substantial amount has been used to buy up corporate sector bonds. In other words, buying up shares in companies. That's over €10,000 for every Eurozone citizen, and would have been enough to provide $105 a month for the entire period, €400 a month, euros a month for a family of 4. Similar story in the UK, where the Bank of England has purchased £847 billion pounds worth of gilts since 2009, £12,600 for every UK citizen, and they just last week announced making available another 85, actually I think it's 65 billion, to prop up the financial markets to prevent the pound collapsing. This is essentially helicopter money, but the trouble is, who benefits? It's not citizens. It's the financial markets which get pushed. The asset values on the financial markets are pushed up by this central bank money creation. So corporations and the financial markets all make money out of this. But the various people, including Positive Money, who have a thing called Quantitative Easing for people, and there have been books on this. The idea is that you could use central bank money creation just for putting money directly into people's pockets, and it would be a darn sight more sensible than what's currently being done. The second idea is negative income tax, which has been proposed by that well-known lefty communist Milton Friedman, who was arguing in 1968 that you could replace much of the current tax and benefit system and welfare system with what he called a negative income tax, where essentially below a certain amount you don't pay tax, you actually get paid back tax. In fact, it's exactly the same thing. It's functionally equivalent to a basic income where you pay a certain amount and you tax at a flat rate. It's actually more sensible to talk about the level of this stipend thing, because the point at which you stop getting negative tax just depends on the rate at which you tax. So let's take a case of how this might work in the UK. I've tried to get a distribution of UK income. This is a graph which, actually, I have to be honest, this is data that you get off the government website, and this is that sort of guesswork, because actually they don't give you the income distribution for people who aren't paying tax. You only get this, this bit here. Now, if you read The Sun, I'm sure you all do, you will know that nearly half of adults in the UK don't pay an income tax at all. So basically, I took that thing to try and fit the bottom half of the curve using income distribution in France, where you can see this is the complete thing from 0 up to the 100th percentile. And in France, it's clear that about 10% of people actually have no income at all. Now, that's your income before tax in the UK, and that's what you have after tax. You start paying tax around here, and it gradually ramps up. So what the negative income tax based on a basic income would do is this. Let's say you give people £6,000 a year as a basic income, then you flat tax at, say, 30%. Now, it's fairly obvious that there'll be an equilibrium point where you stop getting this negative tax, because it's the point where your £6,000 a year of UBI is cancelled out by the £6,000 in tax that you would pay on your £20,000 income, 30% of 2,000 being 6,000. Now, one of the truly remarkable things about this is that it's self-financing. That means that there are 64% of people who receive money get a negative income tax effectively, and 36% that contribute. But it just so happens that with these numbers, £6,000 a year and 30% tax, the contributors will pay for all the money needed to pay the receivers. Under such a scheme, 81% of the public would pay less tax than they are doing today, and only those earning more than £28,500 would actually pay any more at all. But even at £100,000 an annum, you'd still be paying less than 25%. So it's not terrible. There are no tax bands, no tax forms, because basically you would be paid. At the moment your salary comes in, 30% goes to the government. And the other nice thing is, if you wanted to increase the basic income from 6,000 to 8,000, all you have to do is to increase the flat rate from 30% to 40%. So it's a very easy system to adjust. So there are some other advantages of negative income tax. Well, firstly, it's a lot simpler. And in fact, in France, we've already had for some years now a flat rate 30% tax on all investment income, if you get money from dividends or rent or whatever. So basically extending the 30% flat rate to to all income would be really quite straightforward. Another really important thing is that it's much better than means tested benefits. The current system almost universally use means tested benefits. The idea is it helps target the poor. So here you've got your basic income before tax, and then you have a 6,000 up to 6,000 a year of means tested benefits, which as soon as you start earning get sort of tapered off. And that means that you can basically fill in this gap here. But the trouble is with this is that your benefits get reduced when you start working, and it means that the marginal tax rate for somebody around here who goes out and works and earns £100 or something is that they can be effectively pay 80% of that in tax because they remove your benefits. It's the classic poverty trap. So when you have a system like that, it's hardly surprising that many people will prefer to stay on benefits, because you basically, what's the point of going out to work if for every £100 you earn, you lose £80 of benefits. That's entirely eliminated if you have a UBI and a flat tax rate. It's always interesting for everybody to go out and work a bit. The other big thing which would change is undeclared income. Now, there are studies showing that about 16.4% of work is undeclared in Europe. It's actually supposedly only 9% in the UK. I actually quite have difficulty in believing there aren't lots of restaurants employing undeclared people in the UK. Anyway, it's particularly common. And if you imagine that this is your income before tax, but let's imagine that there were £6,000 a year of undeclared income, effectively for anybody, people doing babysitting or gardening or house cleaning or building work, whatever. Often they say, "Oh, would you mind paying me in cash?" for some reason. It's not just poor people; even wealthy people will avoid declaring the money they earn for whatever reason. So with UBI, people will be able to declare their income without losing their benefits. So what would be the point in not declaring it? Okay, you'd pay 30%, but at least you wouldn't be losing 80% of your benefits when you earn £100. So that would be this red curve is what you'd get with a UBI plus total income after tax. So everybody gets shifted up because they can actually, they're visible, and it would look good, I think. So that effectively, using those numbers, you'd have an effective UBI of about 10,200 for somebody who was doing £6,000 worth of undeclared income per year. So the overall cost of UBI would be greatly reduced by this. Let me just talk about one other thing. That's the idea of UBI and families. So far I've been talking about the idea of having a universal basic income for all adults over 18. That's a standard thing. Independent of marital status and so on. But what about the children? So the proposition is that you give the children some percentage of the adult value, could be 50%, and that money would be paid to the parents or the guardians. So if you're adopting, it would be exactly the same. And here's another idea. Maybe you could put the other 50%, which is sort of owed to under 18s, could be put into a savings account and made available at 18. If you think about it, if you had a UBI at £6,000 a year, 18 years and half of that, you'd get £54,000 on your 18th birthday. Which, the idea would be you could use this for various things. I mean, you could almost pay for 3 years of studying at university. No need to borrow money from the government loan scheme. You might start a business, or you could travel the world and do sort of voluntary work, or you could buy yourself a house, etc., etc. There are lots of things which I think people might want to do. I think you'd need to have a sort of review committee to validate a project. It's not a question of just dumping £54,000 on somebody's account so they can go out and get drunk every night. It would have to be a sort of a useful, valid project. But I think it would really seriously increase social cohesion in deprived areas, that kids would know that at 18 they would gain enough money that they could start a business or whatever with that. So the two things I've been talking about so far, central bank money creation and fixing the tax and benefit system, these are things that you can do at a national level. But I think even more exciting is the idea of a global basic income. And there are various people now starting to talk about the idea that we should be doing basic income not for, in a particular place, but for everybody. These people at World Basic Income in the UK are proposing, you could start with $1 a day, but actually they're proposing $100 a month for everybody on the planet, all 8 billion of us. Now, how could that be implemented? Well, actually not very complicated. You'd have to create a sort of global citizens bank, but then you'd have to provide mobile phones to everybody. Well, it turns out many people have already got mobile phones, even in Africa and India and so on. And they're really very cheap. This is the cheapest phone you can get in Africa. It's about $6. But to do a proper one, I think you probably need some sort of way of identifying who something like fingerprint or facial recognition. For ID verification, and for that you might need a smartphone. But even smartphones don't cost that much. I mean, this is an Indian one. It costs $60. I mentioned the number of people in the world now who have a mobile subscription is 67%. It wouldn't take that much more effort to just provide a mobile connection for everybody on the planet, which would allow them to have a basic account. You just open an account and you can send SMSs and things like this to send money to people. So you'd want to just credit everybody's account by whatever, $100 a month. You might start with $1 a day, but then I think $100 a month would actually be worth doing. And that the money would actually be purely virtual. I mean, it would be on a secure computer system somewhere using blockchain encryption to make sure it can't be hacked. But there's no actual real money here, as with many money systems. So here are some advantages of doing things this way. Think about you're trying to get aid to people at the bottom of the ladder in Africa or India or whatever. What you'd like to do with aid distribution is to give let's say $20 to somebody, some official who would send it to his minions. They would get who are supposed to split the money between the people at the bottom, so that everybody gets $1 each. Or you might be using this system to distribute bags of rice or tents for refugees. That's what you'd like, but of course everybody knows that it's not like that in the real world. The real world, you give $20 to somebody, he'll pocket $4, hand it to his people below, they'll pocket $2 each, and in the end you hardly get, there's a massive holes at the bottom. So it's like, it's complete waste of resources trying to get money in this way. How could you improve on that situation? Well, the global basic income, where you just put money in people's accounts, would say you give a dollar to everybody, and then they choose what they want to use it for. They can choose, for instance, electricity, water, or food. Which is more important to you, this week. You need electricity or water. They would choose. You could also use that to choose the type of supplier. So it might be a government or an NGO or a commercial provider of facilities. Now, what's great about this, is that whereas free basic services, I mean, you can have somebody in an office in Geneva who decides how much rice everybody needs, but if the people at the bottom don't have any money, market forces can't operate. The forces which will allow people to decide what sort of resources they need most and what sort of way do they want them provided. So if we just let technological unemployment take its course, there won't be enough people earning money to allow the market system to work. And I think UBI is therefore the only solution, because it would be vastly more efficient, eliminate corruption, and it's actually necessary for a free market system to work, to function correctly. It only works if people have got some money to spend. So again, the question is, at a global level, how might one pay for a basic income? And this is an idea that I've been pushing actually since since I started in 2010. But the idea of using financial transaction tax to pay for an unconditional basic income at the global level, I actually have been looking at that since 2017. It would cost $10.6 trillion. Interestingly, paying people at 50% of median income or paying everybody $100 a month is essentially the same cost. Now, that 10.6 trillion sounds a lot of money, but it's less than 0.1% of the global financial transactions, which I've been monitoring for several years now using figures from the Bank for International Settlements. They total $15 quadrillion, so these are billions of dollars here, huge quantities of financial transactions. But even those massive numbers are massive underestimates, because the Bank for International Settlements doesn't even include the Options Clearing Corporation, which was proudly trumpeting the fact that in August they had the third highest month on record with, 912 million contracts. In fact, per year, we're now at about 10 billion transactions. Unfortunately, the OCC won't tell you how much those transactions are worth. There are 10 billion of them. I think it's quite possible that these sort of transactions are sort of big movements of value, and could easily be, on average, about $1 million each, which would mean that we're talking about another 10 quadrillion dollars on top of that. It also doesn't include about 100 billion every day in cryptocurrency trading. So I think there's little doubt that you could perfectly well finance the entire global transaction, the global universal basic income by a financial transaction tax of under 0.1%. Now, importantly, it would be paid by everybody, including me. It would be extremely easy to implement. Literally, it's like one line of code in the software that you use to transfer money. And contrary to the belief that a 0.1% tax would collapse, mean that transactions would disappear completely, some people claim this, it's actually roughly the same charge as the financial sector itself makes. If you go through a clearing bank and you want to move $1 billion or something, they will charge you. The more you move, the less they charge. But on average, it's about 0.1%. So it's just not true that this would clobber the possibility of using financial transactions. Just a quick plug for the first thing I ever published on the economy. This is in 2010. I was arguing actually you could use a financial transaction tax, one tax to replace the vast majority of existing taxes, VAT, income tax, taxes on profits, etc. So I'm a big fan for a long time. But there's actually another tax that I think we need to think about, which is a tax on assets. I've been pushing this idea for a few years now. Let's suppose we had a 1% tax of all assets. Well, if you look at the Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report for 2022, you discover that global wealth, this is household wealth, totaled 463 trillion. Now, we've all seen these pyramids where we say, the top 1% of the population owns has as much wealth as the bottom half, and then you've got you can expand this top 1%. You see, there's 250,000 people with wealth of over $50 million, and so on. What I think is really important, and it's not just the very rich who benefit from this, but asset prices have been going up on average by 6.6% every year for the last 20 years. The rich people had a tough time in 2008 because of the financial crash. But look, the rest of the time, you can be pretty sure that your assets are going to increase in value by 6.6% every year. So paying 1% is hardly the end of the world. But that's just personal wealth. That's household wealth. What about companies? Well, I downloaded the figures for the Forbes Global 2000 companies and discovered that between them, they hold assets of $234 trillion. This is not personal wealth; it's companies that have it. And what is particularly striking, this is just the top 100 out of the 2,000, and they're nearly all banks. The light yellow is banking and insurance and so on. The first non-financial thing is MetLife. It's a health company in the US. And then the first real manufacturing company is Volkswagen. They're at 67. And then you've got oil companies. You've got AT&T, Toyota, and Amazon comes in at 94. Most of the assets are held by banks and pension funds and all the rest of it. That's just the top 2,000. There are 43,000 public companies in the world, and I haven't been bothered to download their accounts every year, but there's going to be lots of, going to be trillions of more of assets which are declared. They have to declare them every year. And then, of course, there are private companies, of which there are 7 million in the US alone, some of which have huge, like Cargill and Koch Industries. Now, some of this will be personal wealth. The Koch brothers will figure very highly in the list of the most wealthy people. But basically, whether it's taxing company assets, I would say, is much better than taxing their profits, because profits are easy to move around. Furthermore, both public and private companies have to declare their assets every year. So just adding a thing at the end of your declaration saying, we own, $1 million worth of assets, and here's my check for $10,000, is really not very complicated. Interestingly, in such a scheme, startups would pay virtually no tax. If you're not taxing profits, then to start with, a startup doesn't make much profit. I think that's normal. It's normal that companies should only start paying when they start to accumulate assets. So here's another figure which I think is really good from Savills. They just total the residential real estate, agricultural land, commercial real estate, gold and things like this. So together we have personal wealth at 463 trillion. We've got the top 2,000 companies, 234 trillion. The other companies, I don't know, 100 trillion maybe. What about assets held by trusts? These are neither individuals or companies. There's a wonderful scheme for hiding money. And then you've got the value of insured goods like yachts and aircraft and so on. And also the wealth owned by states. So, for instance, in the UK, the Ministry of Defence and the Crown owns lots of land. I think they should be paying 1% of the value of that every year as well. So there's almost no doubt that the total is going to be easily $1 quadrillion, which means that the 1% tax on that would generate 10 trillion needed to pay for a universal basic income. The only slight problem with this is that it's possible that the rich asset owners could block such a proposal, because of course they will not be happy to hand over their assets. But I have a solution for that, and that's the third part of my talk. It's an IOU-based system in which you don't actually ask anybody to hand over any hard-earned cash or assets. You just get them to emit an IOU. So this is an idea that I've been thinking about actually since 2014. At the time I called it the OAM system, and I now call it IOUNet. Imagine that you've got 5 people: Andy, Bill, Chris, Danny and Emily. And Andy does some babysitting for Bill. Bill sends Andy an IOU for $20, which means that Bill is minus 20 and Andy is plus 20. But note that the system is at 0. There's no money here at all. Then Bill does a bit of driving for Chris, and Chris sends an IOU for 20 back to Bill. Chris provides some apples to Danny. Danny sends an IOU for 20 back. Danny does some teaching for Emily, and she sends an IOU for 20. And then Emily cooks some nice bread for Andy and gets $20 IOU coming back. Now we've now got actually $100 of credit in the system, but we've got a loop, and so you can cancel this loop out by a little algorithmic trick. Bingo, the credit disappears, but you've still had the work done. So you've got work, and services and goods have been exchanged, and people have been doing useful things for each other. There was no money at all in this. Now those IOUs can be emitted in anything you like. They can be in euros or pounds or dollars or bitcoins or a local exchange system thing. It doesn't matter. I actually got as far as setting up an IOU net system using Cyclos 4, which is it's an open source software thing for building your own bank, is actually. And the only difference with the standard one is that there was no money in it. It was all done by IOUs. With a company at Quantitative Technologies, we were trying to get the loop cancelling mechanism put in. That's the only thing that's missing. Otherwise, it's ready to fly. Let me just expand this a little bit more. Instead of just rather than just Andy, Bill, Chris, Danny, and Emily, let's have 26 people sending IOUs around. Here you can see for each person how much credit they've got, how much debit they've got, and this is their net value. So, for instance, if you just do randomly send things around, individuals will have different levels of credit and debt, of course. And their net situation will also vary a lot. So Emily here is at -4, and Warren here is at +5. The system is still at 0. There's still no money in this. But you're just keeping your tabs on who owes how much to who. Now, I was talking about this loop cancelling thing, and let's take this as a very obvious loop, because Andy owes Bill, Bill owes Chris, Chris owes Danny, etc., until you get to Zoe, who owes Andy 1. This is clearly a loop, and so bingo, it all disappears. Here's a more complicated loop. It turns out it is also a loop because each person's debt is the same as their credit. And here's another one, and here's another one, and if we pile these things together, we've now got lots of stuff. And, well, if you look at this relative to what I just showed you, the random thing, it's the same amount of credit, 78 units. You'd be hard pushed to say, is this random? Is this has loops in it? Until you get the loop cancelling software to go bing, and it all disappears. And you can do this, I've been using wands, but it's the same thing if you have other numbers, so there's no problem. That is also a looped system. Now, Jake Martin, who was my postdoc some time ago, he actually wrote some software for finding the loops in this sort of directed graph thing. And he discovered that if you take this is a bunch of people who've sent IOUs between them. If you apply the loop elimination algorithm, roughly 50% drops out on chance. But I think we can do better. Is there a way to maximize the efficiency of the loop cancelling mechanism? And the answer is yes, and it's called UBI, Universal Asset Tax. So here's the idea: we take our group of people and we add a citizens bank here. So we got in addition to the 26 people, we've got a bank here, and the mechanism is that wealthy people, the ones who've got some assets, might be, or they're using financial transactions or whatever, they pay they send IOUs to the bank. So you've got these people paying into the bank. There's 26 units of credit, and there's 26 of them. So you just divide the 26 by the number of people, and actually in this case they get $1 each. And then you add some more transactions in. Here's some more transactions, which are those all loops? Well, yes. Bit of loop cancelling, they all go. So we've had this situation where because there's a bank that's giving money to everybody every day or every week or whatever, plus people putting money in, this makes the whole loop process much more efficient than just trying to do transactions on an individual basis. So having a bank to circulate the IOUs from wealthy citizens greatly increases efficiency. And here's the neat trick: the wealthy don't actually have to transfer any money at all. There's, Andy hasn't actually sent any money; he's just sent an IOU. But what's nice is that the more they contribute, the more they send IOUs to the citizen bank, the better the system works. So, if you were somebody with lots of assets, the more you put those assets as IOUs into the bank, the more that the people in the community around you will have money to buy your stuff. And if you're a businessman, this makes incredible sense. If you're Amazon, for instance, if you're and you want people to buy lots of Amazon stuff, if you give the Citizens Bank a large IOU every month, and that gets split between the people, they can all go out and buy stuff from Amazon. So it makes perfect sense for everybody to use this system. Let's have a look at the situation in the UK, just as an example. So here I've got taken the figures from the Office for National Statistics, where we've got for the 10 deciles in the UK. This is how much net worth people have got. Essentially nothing if you're down at the bottom, but if you're in the top 1%, you've got assets that are worth £4.4 million. I've got the table here. So this actually includes net financial assets, physical assets, that's things like cars and so on and so forth. Net property value, that's the value of your property once you've deducted how much you owe on your mortgage. Private pension schemes and so on. And this gives you this figure here. And here is how much you would be asked to send an IOU for if you were using a 1% tax. In addition to that, you'd have your expenditure. I don't actually know what the expenditure is for the top 1%. I couldn't find the figures, but this is the expenditure per year for households in the different deciles. You can see actually the people down at the bottom are also spending quite a lot, but their income is not negligible. So if we then add in our 0.1% financial transaction tax, we add this in together. So this is the total amount of IOUs in pounds that people in the UK would be typically submitting, depending on where they are in the earnings scale. Now remember, nobody actually transfers any money. You don't actually have to hand over your money. You just send an IOU. And everybody is contributing with exactly the same fixed rules. So it's 0.1% of your financial transactions you'd pay when you pay a credit card payment, or your salary comes in, 0.1% to pay, and so on. It would also be so expenditure and income would have those taxes, and there would be 1% of your total wealth per year. As I say, net financial wealth, net property worth, physical stuff, household content, and also pension funds, which is enormous, obviously, for the people at the top. Their assets there are huge. So this would fund a global universal basic income of $100 a month for everybody on the planet, if everybody, including businesses, banks, traders, trusts and governments, accepted to contribute IOUs in the same way. And of course you would have to get rid of tax havens, but I think that's doable. I think if you said everybody was going to play the game, it's not because you're in the Cayman Islands that you're going to get away with this. I don't care who owns the assets of this company, but if it's got assets of a certain amount, it's 1% IOU every year for everybody. So to summarize, as far as I can see, UBI is definitely affordable. At the national level, you can have central or regional for the European Central Bank. You can have central bank money creation, QE for people. And so instead of using that money creation to pump up the financial markets, you'd combine it. You'd put it into people's pockets. And I should mention, there's another trick you can use with a financial transaction tax, which is to remove, if you have the central bank pushing money into people's pockets via the basic income, and they can also remove money using the financial transaction tax to make sure that the system mop up any excess, and you can guarantee that there's no inflation in such a system. Then we had negative income tax, which is essentially a UBI plus a flat rate income tax. It eliminates all the need for all means tested benefits. In other words, it doesn't matter where you are on the scale. When you go out and work, you get to keep 70% of that after tax. You could also at the same time eliminate all tax loopholes. Currently, we have huge numbers in France, like several hundred tax loopholes where you can claim off your tax bill if you're employing a cleaning lady or something like this. No, I think these. If the government wants to encourage desirable behaviour like installing heat pumps and insulation, You can do that much more efficiently just by having direct subsidies, just direct payments to people to help them buy and install things like heat pumps. In fact, in France, there's a €6,000 flat subsidy for anybody buying an electric car. No means testing. I think that's a much more sensible way, because otherwise, it's only people who are paying tax, i.e., only less than half the population that benefit. We saw a global financial transaction tax less than 0.1% would work, or a global asset tax at 1% per annum. And then we saw you could actually do the whole thing in an IOU-based system with no actual money at all. So people wouldn't even have to hand over money. They just have to play the system with everybody else. So it's really smart. It's smart because it's totally fair. Everybody is treated in the same way. There are none of these taxes which are directed towards particular groups of people. It's extremely simple because they're all flat. Everything's completely flat, which means that trivial in implementation costs. Very difficult to avoid. If you pay a financial transaction tax, it's very difficult not to pay it. And it would eliminate all tax havens, which I think would be an extremely good thing. And here's another thing. It would eliminate the risk of massive migration, because believe me, if you were giving $100 a month to people living in Africa, I think the chances that they would want to cross over the Sahara Desert, with a risk of dying, which is non-negligible, and then cross over the Mediterranean to try to get to Europe, would be much less. Because basically $100 a month is a much better deal when you're in a poor country than it is in a rich country. And all of these things will directly contribute to tackling things like climate change, and also go towards the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that have been agreed by 193 countries in 2015. We all agree on this, we just don't have a way of financing it. And in the context of today's talk, it has this a very important thing. It eliminates the risks of technological unemployment, because I think, I hopefully convinced you that the amount of paid work will decrease when you've got things like, GPT-3 and DALI 2 and all the rest of this coming on stream, and they're free and they work really well. It's going to be harder and harder to find places where people are going to pay you money to do things. But once you've got the basic income system in place, you can increase those basic income payments to compensate. And what would be really nice would be that people will be able to choose their lifestyle. I mean, some relatively modest percentage might choose to have no additional income, maybe get by on just the basic income. If 10% of the population were doing that, so that's fine with me. They could be doing useful voluntary work, doing the arts or gardening or whatever. Some will choose part-time work, and they might choose to do 2 hours a day, or a day a week, or a week a month, or a month a year. And some will work 60 hours a week if they wish. I don't think there's any need to have any restrictions. I mean, we don't like sort of exploiting people with the Uber system, but if they've already got basic income, they're always free to say, no thanks, I'm not coming in today. One of the other nice things about this is that unpleasant jobs, like unblocking sewers, would be extremely well paid, because nobody would do them otherwise. It would be the end of the artificial fixed retirement age. I mean, there's endless arguments in France about whether it should be 62 or 65 or 67. In this system, there isn't a retirement age. If somebody wants to retire at 40 and go and grow vegetables and live in the country, that's fine. They've effectively retired from paid work, but they could be extremely active after that anyway. It also removes the stigma of being unemployed. I mean, the whole thing about scribers and scroungers disappears. Somebody who decides to live only on the basic income is actually doing the rest of us a favour by reducing their level of consumption and doing what everybody should be trying to do anyway. And finally, it would end the idea that a person's value is somehow determined by how much they earn. This is absolutely ridiculous. Somebody who is looking after elderly parents or their kids is doing extremely valuable work. It's just not paid for. And in a world with basic income, that difference will just disappear. Yeah, you get paid a lot if you're doing something that is worth doing. but that doesn't mean that when you're not being paid, you're not doing something useful. So the take-home messages. I think the AI revolution and automation are going to profoundly impact society. We've seen, already things like deep learning-based systems and software like GPT-3 running on chips are already replacing skilled jobs. But if I'm right, the sort of terror brain style systems that I've been looking at recently would have more power than a human brain and run on the equivalent of an iPad. These will be destroying many other paid jobs. And I think continuing with the current economic system would be catastrophic. We can't let it go on like that. But I think the solution is already available. We've got at least 4 ways to implement a universal basic income, and a global IOUNet type system could allow the entire economic system to be implemented with no need for actual money transfers at all. And so, my bottom line is that actually I'm not too afraid about the future, because AI and neural network technologies could allow the development of an attractive utopian society, essentially like ancient Greece, where people sat around doing philosophy and science and theatre and so on, except that instead of using slaves, we'd be using robots. I think that's something worth fighting for. Thanks.